Did you know the world's most popular breakfast cereal was invented to stop people from pleasuring themselves? Yep, cornflakes started as a bizarre moral crusade led by a man obsessed with enemas, eugenics and bland food. In Dr. Kellogg's own words, such a victim literally dies by their own hand. Kellogg's believed that the practice of this solitary vice would cause cancer of the womb, urinary diseases, impotence, epilepsy, insanity, and mental and physical disabilities. But that really is just the tip of the iceberg in the wacky and controversial world of Dr. John Harvey Kellogg. From feuds with his brother over adding sugar to the cereal, to prescribing yogurt enemas at his health spa, and even trying to improve humanity through forced sterilization. This is the wild and untold story behind the creation of cornflakes. So grab yourself some breakfast, preferably something not invented to suppress your desires, and let's dive into how this bland little flake became a symbol of morality, health, and corporate success. Before he became one of the most controversial health reformers in American history, John Harvey Kellogg was just a young boy growing up in a deeply religious household. Born in 1852 in Tyrone, Michigan, he was one of 11 kids raised in the shadow of the brand new rising Seventh-day Adventist Church, a strict reformist Christian denomination that would end up shaping his whole worldview. The church are huge advocates for healthy, clean living, advocates of a strict vegetarian diet, avoidance of alcohol, caffeine and processed foods. All things I could certainly support myself, however, Kellogg would take it a little bit too far. He proved to be the final boss in white guy cooking, when he believed that rich, spicy and flavorful foods would stimulate passions and desires. He was a staunch advocate for purity and believed that simple, bland foods would help people avoid excitement or indulgent behavior. The Kellogg family would end up moving to Battle Creek in Michigan, which was the mecca for the Seventh-day Adventists. Because they were so confident of Christ's second coming and the end of the world, none of the Kellogg children were really formally educated. But John Harvey Kellogg, however, with his interest in healthy living, decided to educate himself and earned a medical degree in 1875. Just a couple years later, at the age of 24, John Kellogg would come back to Battle Creek and take over the Sanitarium, a part luxury spa, part medical facility where the rich would come to recover from ailments that they didn't fully understand. But Kellogg wasn't just interested in treating his patients, he wanted to reform their whole bodies, mind and souls. He had a vision of creating the healthiest place on earth. His basic core ideas being that the body is a temple, he wrote in one of his many books on health, all the inventions and devices ever constructed by the human hand or conceived by the human mind, no matter how delicate, how intricate and complicated, are simple childish toys compared with that of the marvellously wrought mechanisms of the human body. Under Kellogg's leadership, the Sanitarium became famous for its unusual and often bizarre treatments. He preached a vegetarian diet, daily exercise, and an absolute abstinence from alcohol, tobacco, and many other indulgences. Patients could also enjoy electric light baths, vibrating chairs, and even mechanical horse rides to stimulate circulation. But one of the centerpieces of the health sanitarium was called his biological plumbing methods. He was obsessed with the bowels and believed that most diseases stemmed from having a dirty colon. To cleanse his patients' colons, Kellogg would prescribe daily enemas. His technique would involve blasting 15 gallons of water through a patient's bowels in just seconds. He was also a big fan of yogurts, making patients consume 1 litre of yogurt every single day. And I say consume rather than eat because you would only have to eat half a litre. The other half was fired right up your rectum in effort to balance out your gut bacteria. But despite these extreme methods, Kellogg attracted the attention from some of the biggest names of the era. Presidents, tycoons and celebrities flocked to Battle Creek, eager to experience the sanitarium's treatment. With the great Teddy Roosevelt loving it so much, he actually visited twice. It was at the Battle Creek Sanitarium where Kellogg would try to revolutionize breakfast. This is a look at the breakfast menu from the sanitarium itself in 1900. As you can see, it's all veggie and no bursting flavors in sight. If we just go back to page 1 on the menu, you'll notice breakfast food. This was indeed what we know today as the cornflake. As mentioned earlier, Kellogg believed that sexual impulses and masturbation were morally and physically harmful. He wrote extensively about how simple, plain diets could reduce these evil impulses. So in 1894, Dr. Kellogg and his younger brother, William Keith Kellogg, were experimenting with new vegetarian food ideas to serve to patients at the sanitarium. The story goes that They were working with a boiled wheat to create a palatable, easy to digest meal when they accidentally left a batch of boiled wheat sitting out, causing it to become stale. Instead of discarding it, they added it through the rollers to see if it could still be used. Surprisingly, the wheat formed thin flakes rather than the dough they expected. When toasted, these flakes became crisp and had a pleasant texture and taste. The brothers would call their new product cornflakes and began serving it to patients at the Sanitarium. John Harvey's brother, William Keith Kellogg, saw potential in the cornflake. He believed that it had a life outside of the Sanitarium to be enjoyed by American consumers across the country. However, Dr. John Harvey Kellogg was less enthusiastic about turning it into a business venture. He was more focused on its health benefits than the commercial potential. The difference in perspective led to tension between the two brothers, and it wasn't just tension between the two Kellogg brothers that was starting to reach a boiling point. By the early 1900s, even the Seventh-day Adventist Church was starting to question some of John Kellogg's ideas and views. Co-founder of the church, Ellen White, who actually helped fund John's medical degree, started to question some of John's beliefs. John started to teach that God is not an actual person who is a physical, tangible being. Instead, God is just an essence. God is in fact the universe itself. John would submit a book and publish these teachings to disgust of much of the church. However, the publishing house burnt down before the book could be printed. Coincidence or striking act of God? Well, in the same year, 1902, the Battle Creek Sanitarium would also burn down to the ground. Dr. Kellogg was adamant that this was just a coincidence, and the church was whittling away funds, so he had to go ahead and publish the book anyway. Sales of the book would end up funding the rebuilding of the sanitarium, despite many objections from people of the church, but the Battle Creek Sanitarium had become bigger than the church to Dr. Kellogg. It was his mecca for saving the human race, the place that he could work to make the human race pure. Upon reopening a year after the fire, the sanitarium would continue to grow, seeing more famous visitors such as Amelia Earhart, Henry Ford, and J.C. Penney himself. Dr. Kellogg grew the health spa to being talked about as a staple of American high society. However, after the Wall Street crash in 1929, many of the regular patrons were no longer interested in the luxury health facility, and the building was eventually purchased by the US Army, who would use it as a hospital. The building still stands today and is currently a government office building. It wasn't until 12 years after the accidental invention of the cornflake that in 1906, William Keith Kellogg would finally make the decision to break away from his brother and try to take the cornflake nationwide. He established the Battle Creek Toasted Cornflake Company, which would later be renamed to the Kellogg Company. William Keith added sugar to the cornflake recipe, making it more appealing to the general public. He also pioneered the use of marketing campaigns and colourful packaging to draw attention to the new breakfast cereal, making it one of the first heavily marketed branded foods. By promoting it as a convenient, healthy breakfast option, Kellogg cornflakes quickly gained popularity. Kellogg's success with cornflakes marked the beginning of the commercial cereal industry. Over the years, the company would expand its product line and introduce a wide variety of cereals, including Rice Krispies and Frosted Flakes. William Keith Kellogg continued to focus on quality and consistency, making sure his product were widely available and marketed as a wholesome breakfast choice. His vision paid off. By the mid-20th century, Kellogg had become one of the most recognized cereal brands worldwide. Kellogg's revolutionized the way people think about breakfast, moving away from traditional heavy foods to lighter, quick options. Cornflakes also set the foundation for the global cereal industry, which still thrives today. Kellogg remains one of the largest food companies in the world, still headquartered in Battle Creek, Michigan, and cornflakes continue to be a popular breakfast choice worldwide today. Unfortunately, our story doesn't end there. It actually gets a hell of a lot darker. While William Keith Kellogg was enjoying all the successes from cornflakes, John Harvey Kellogg's techniques would ramp up a notch. He'd eventually decide that bland foods were no longer enough for people to abstain from sexual desires, so he would graduate to the next obvious step. Genital mutilation, of course. These methods were used on both boys and girls in some of the most horrific incidences you could imagine. He wrote in his book, Plain Facts for Old and Young, a remedy which is almost always successful in small boys is circumcision. The operation should be performed by a surgeon without administering any anaesthetic, as the brief pain attending the operation will have a salutary effect upon the mind. He also recommended bandaging children's hands at night time, or putting a metal wire through the end of the foreskin and twisting it together. As I quote, "It is now impossible for an erection to occur, and the slight irritation thus produced acts as a powerful means of overcoming the disposition to resort to the practice." And I'd hate to be sexist, so let's not forget about the ladies. He writes in the same book, in females, the application of pure carbolic acid to the clitoris acts as an excellent means of allaying any abnormal excitement. It's also worth noting John Kellogg was actually married, but he never consummated his own marriage. Being so terrified of erections and coming, I suppose it's very on brand. In 1914, Dr. John Harvey Kellogg would launch the Race Betterment Foundation. Honestly, still calling him a doctor at this point seems outright wrong, so let me just call him John from now on. He believed that the human race was threatened by racial mixing, and he hoped that he could teach so-called well-born people how to maintain their heritage and pass it on to the next generation. His Race Betterment Foundation would encourage people from good pedigrees to procreate. John Kellogg would also propose creating a eugenics register that could be used to create a pedigree of proper breeding between people. Prospective parents would have to meet strict standards of racial hygiene, and their children would then receive pedigrees based on their heritable characteristics. What a horrible, horrible man. John Kellogg would completely fall out of his brother, William Harvey Kellogg, because of their differences over the creation of the cornflake, and eventually, William Keith Kellogg would take John Kellogg to court and win the rights to use the Kellogg name. John Kellogg would end up living to the ripe old age of 91. A very long life, especially in the context of the era, so hey, maybe we should all be blasting our sphincters with yogurt and water. I can't really advise for the other stuff though.